So when I was in my 20s, I read a lot of the books that everyone recommends on self-improvement and living a better quality of life. And honestly, there was a lot of good stuff in these. But as I moved into my 30s and 40s, I read a handful of books that changed the way I think and do things so much that I honestly wish I'd read them like a decade earlier. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about 4 not so well-known books that I think can really improve your quality of life. I'm going to explain what I think I would have got from them if I'd read them a decade ago and who I think should read them now. And the first one, kind of appropriately, is How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. So this is kind of the classic guide to reading effectively and deeply, aimed at helping you extract maximum value from whatever it is you happen to be reading. The stuff in it is more important for non-fiction than fiction, and is probably more appropriate to stuff like philosophy and politics than science, because often a lot of philosophical reading builds on the stuff that's come before, and you quite often need to understand the ideas that's in the early stuff before you get into the later stuff. So as the authors explain it, there are 4 levels of reading. Elementary, which is how you learn to read in school. Inspectional, which means skimming the book to understand its main points and structure, which is something you'd usually want to do in just a few minutes. Analytical, where your aim is to not just understand what's being said, but develop your own opinion about it. This is what most of the book is about. And syntopical, or what most people might call comparative reading, where you're trying to understand all the conflicting viewpoints on a topic. And so the whole book's full of practical strategies for what you might call active reading, and that ranges from flicking through the contents of a book to understand its overall structure, arguments and themes, to creating a bibliography that will allow you to understand a topic in depth. And some of it feels slightly outdated now, so there's a long discussion on the benefits and weaknesses of encyclopedias, and in the modern age of Wikipedia, some of that just isn't relevant anymore. But this is a fantastic resource to start with if you're thinking about reading some of the classics of Western literature, and there's a huge appendix and bibliography that basically guides you through the Western canon. And even though I've always read a lot, there's a lot of stuff in here that I hadn't considered before, and so now I'm thinking about going back to some of the classics with these lessons in mind. But there's kind of an interesting postscript to this one, because the next book argues that what Adler calls reading for comprehension is actually quite a modern invention, because in the past, all reading was for comprehension because print was the best way of sharing ideas. So that book is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, and even though this was written in the 80s as a critique of TV, it feels incredibly relevant in our modern age of streaming and social media. So one of Postman's big arguments is that when everyone got their information through print alone, then the world felt rational and understandable and demanded engagement from its citizens. But then with the development of photography, the telegraph and eventually television, news and politics became about entertainment, and we increasingly choose our politicians not based on the strength of their arguments, but the way they make us feel. One of Postman's main concerns is the way TV inundates us with information that feels kinda useful, but actually causes us to lose sight of what's really useful, which he calls context-free information. And a line I really like here is, ask yourself how often the information provided to you on television causes you to alter your plans for the day, or take some action which you would otherwise not have taken, or provides you with information you need to solve a problem. And so thinking about that line has really helped me scale back how much news and social media I take in, because while it feels kind of good to be informed about what's going on in the world, a lot of the information we take in every day is pretty much completely unnecessary. And I think that's something that would have helped me waste a lot less time like a decade ago. So I'm trying to reassess my own relationship with social media, and this book has been helping me do that. Book number 3 is Writing to Learn by William Zinsser. And this isn't just a book for people who want to learn to write. The concept behind it is that writing things down helps you order your thoughts and understand new ideas. It can kind of expose gaps in your reasoning and help you to think more clearly. So it's divided into 2 parts. The first one is kind of an introduction to the reasons Zinsser thinks we should all write, and then the second part introduces a whole bunch of examples of good writing. And I've always kind of done some of the stuff he talks about in this book. I've been a professional writer for about 20 years now, and I've always found that explaining complex topics for someone else to understand can be the best way of getting to grips with them myself. But the reason I wish I'd read this book earlier is that Writing to Learn doesn't just work for the sort of topics I want to write about. It can also help you to understand basically anything like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or music theory. And so since I've read this book, I've really started to write out in my own words concepts that I'm trying to understand better, like how leg locks work in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or certain like scientific or philosophical stuff I'm trying to get to grips with. And so I think this is super helpful for anybody who wants to improve their ability to process and understand information, and that's whether they want to just improve on their own or share with others. But if you're interested in learning, then I also strongly recommend Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. So this only came out about a decade ago, but even then I would have found it really useful because it's a great introduction to what we currently know about the science of successful learning. So this book kind of challenges traditional approaches to studying, such as rereading and highlighting, and it emphasizes different techniques like retrieval practice, which is constantly testing yourself on your learning, or spaced repetition, which you would do with flashcards or Anki decks, and interleaving, or studying different ideas in a practice session. And this is all stuff I'd sort of naturally started doing as I learned stuff like piano and grappling. But it would have been great to understand it before, because there's also science to suggest that doing this stuff can make learning not just more effective, but also more long lasting. But if you'd like to put all this stuff together, then there's one more book that I'd really recommend to make the most of everything you're reading, whatever stage of life you're at. That book is How to Take Smart Notes by Sonke Arons, and if you'd like to learn more about the system in that book and how I've adapted it to work better for me, I've got a whole video about that right here. I'll see you over there.